Stone here with Jamstone Magic, and I'd like to share with you one of our newer products. It's the Giant and the Gnome. You know, ages ago, we used to have enchanted forests all over the world. And in these enchanted forests lived magical creatures. Unicorns and fairies and griffins and giants and gnomes. Speaking of gnomes, did you know most gnomes live in the forest and live in trees? They live in hollow trees and under bushes and maybe sometimes in little caves, all except for one. This is my friend Gus. And Gus the gnome lives in a castle. He's got a castle all his own. Not only does he have a castle, he's also got a special garden. That garden is a candy garden. And in that candy garden, he grows all kinds of candy. He grows stretchy taffy, he grows jawbreakers, candy corn, jawbreakers and lemon drops, all kinds of candy. Well, one day Gus goes out to his garden and he finds that the garden has been trampled. A lot of the plants have been trampled over and there's big old footprints everywhere and there's candy that's only had one bite taken out of it and cast aside. Somebody has been sneaking into Gus's garden, destroying things and stealing his candy. Well, Gus doesn't like that. Gus figures that he's got to find out who's stealing his candy and put a stop to it. So what he decides to do is he goes to the top of his castle and he sits all the way at the very top of the castle and he watches, because from the top of the castle he can see all the way past the garden, all the way to the forest. He can see everything, so he'll be able to see anybody that comes to his garden. And he sits there all day and he waits and he waits and he watches and he waits. In the evening time, the trees begin to shake. The ground begins to move. There's a big noise coming from the forest. There was a sound that sounded like this. Fee, fi, fo, fo. That's the sound the giant makes. And the giant's trampling through the garden. He makes that sound everywhere he goes. It's a little rhyme that he made. Actually, his mom made it. What do you mean, it doesn't rhyme? No, it does rhyme. I just got to tell you the rest of it. It's fee, fi, fo, fum. I'm too big to suck my thumb. Yeah, his mom taught him that when he was just a little giant because she didn't want him to suck his thumb. He was a little giant. Have you thought about little giants? He was only knee-high to a skyscraper. That's how big he was or how little he was. But now he's big and he's grown and he's got something that bothers him. A sweet tooth. That sweet tooth has to be satisfied. That sweet tooth, by the way, he hasn't brushed that sweet tooth in ages. It's green and fuzzy, and he's got some serious halitosis. But he loves candy, and candy is what satisfies that sweet tooth. So he comes to the garden, he gets to the garden, and he comes trampling down there. And sure enough, Gus finds that he's been eating the candy. The giant's been the one that's stealing all the candy. Well, Gus decides he's got to figure out a way to put a stop to that. So he decides he'll put a great big fence around the garden. But then he thinks, well, no, the giant will just step over the fence and probably trample the fence in getting into the garden. So fence probably isn't going to work. So he thinks about it. And then it comes to him. All he's got to do is harvest the candy. So Gus decides he'll harvest all the candy so there's no more candy for the giant to steal. So he harvests all the candy, takes it into the castle with him. And the next evening, fee, fi, fo, fum, here comes the giant. He gets to the garden and he sees that there's no candy left. But he sniffs real hard and he realizes he can still smell the candy. So he comes through the garden, stomping on all the plants that are left and making a big old mess. And he's hollering at the top of his lungs, fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell candy and I want some. Well, he gets to the castle and he sees Gus sitting at the top of the castle eating stretchy taffy. Gus looks down and he sees the giant and oh, he's frightened. He's frightened and he's trembling and he's shaking. Well, part of it's because the giant's stomping and shaking the castle. But the other part of it is because he's afraid. Have you ever been afraid? Gus is afraid until he remembers one thing. He remembers that the candy that he's eating from his garden is magical candy. It's an enchanted forest with an enchanted garden, and the candy is enchanted too. So that stretchy taffy, the more you stretch it, the more you chew it, the bigger it gets. He chewed that candy, that Laffy Taffy, and it made him bigger and bigger and taller until he was taller than the castle itself. Well, the giant looked up. The giant saw that. Oh, the giant realized he needed some of that candy. If the candy made Gus that big, how much bigger could it make him? So he decided he would go into the castle too. So he went all the way to the castle. He crossed the moat. He went through the drawbridge door, and he went all the way to the top where Gus had been eating the candy. He got all the way up there, and he found out that Gus had eaten all the stretchy taffy, so there was none left for him to eat. So he couldn't grow bigger. But you know what? He did grow after all. He grew smaller. He grew so much smaller and smaller and smaller till he was about the size of Gus in the beginning. He's no longer too big to suck his thumb, is he? That's the giant and the gnome. This is the aluminum version. It's our deluxe version. It also comes in a standard version, which is PVC. It comes with an alternate giant for you to use if you don't want to use the suck your thumb part. So you can do either ending you want with it. Get yours today at Jamstone Magic, or find us on Facebook.